for not only the party, but a great advisor and a great friend to me. And it is my privilege to introduce to you once again Chairman Robin Hayes.
Hey!
Such wonderful friends. Thank you all for coming and supporting our fantastic party. Quick, absolute, mandatory instruction. Go out and work for Tom Tiller like you have never. Work for Mark Harrah, and I'm pretty sure Heather Grant is here. Folks, we ran a primary. Hey, got some of the lights. I can't see it. We showed the world how to run a primary and to come together around the right ideas to build a coalition, to build a winning combination. Not my mission, my mission is to provide you with an indication. Mr. Speaker, the coach. What's going to talk about this guy later? Give you an invocation, and Ralph Reed said an invitation to go out and change the world on behalf of the Lord, whose blessing I would like for you to join with me in voting. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you overflowing, I hope, with gratitude for the blessings that you have showered upon us, for the time of fellowship, for the nourishment of food, for being in a nation that is a nation of laws, but in order to be a nation of laws, we must be a nation of righteousness. So we ask your blessing. We ask you to help us to deserve that blessing, but we ask your guidance so that we can be in your will and that we can be to others as you have been to us in creating the greatest, freest, and the most giving nation in the world. We ask your help, your guidance, and your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Robin. And we've got a great lineup tonight. I just saw Speaker Hassert walk in, and Governor Huckabee is going to need to be heading out pretty soon. So we're going to go ahead and get our program started. And it is my privilege and honor to welcome Governor Huckabee to our program this evening. I first met Governor Huckabee when his book tour came through Raleigh back in 2010. I was a Wake County GOP chairman at the time, and we worked with his daughter Sarah to rally around, get a crowd together at a book signing at the Quail Ridge bookstore, and it was a cold, rainy evening that night. But the governor also graciously recorded a video with us that night on the bus in one take, and we used that video to promote our precinct meetings that year in the county, and we had record turnout at our precinct meetings in 2010. So I really, really appreciate him and his graciousness in doing that. After an early career in broadcasting and advertising, he spent 12 years as the pastor and a denominational leader. He became the youngest president ever for the Arkansas Southern Baptist State Convention, which is the largest denomination in Arkansas. Huckabee led a rapidly growing congregation in Pine Bluff and Texarkana, and those experiences gave him a deep sense of the problems faced by individuals and families. From 96 to 2007, he served as the 44th governor of the state of Arkansas and was recognized nationally for his leadership. Time magazine honored him as one of the 5 best governors in America, and he served as the chairman of the National Governors Association as well as the Education Commission, the states, and the Interstate Oil and Gas Commission. After his campaign for the Republican nomination for president in 2008, in which he came in second to John McCain, he formed HuckPAC to assist conservative Republicans running for office nationwide and has amassed a volunteer team with thousands of activists in all 50 states. He's now the host of the #1 rated weekend hit Huckabee on the Fox News Channel, Cumulus Media Network syndicated radio program. Mike Huckabee. He is heard on more than 175 stations, and he's also heard 3 times a day across the nation the Huckabee Report, and that's syndicated through almost 600 stations. So he's very active broadcast community. He's also the author of 9 different books, the most recent being A Simple Government, and it's his 4th book to make the New York Times bestseller list. He's also an avid musician and a bass player in his rock and roll band, Capital Offense. Love that name. Has opened for artists such as Willie Nelson, the Charlie Daniels Band, and he's played at the House of Blues in New Orleans, Red Rocks Amphitheater in Denver, and many other locations. Please welcome to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, Governor Mike Huckabee.
In fact, that you had to interrupt your dinner to even stand up to it. Some of you lost your dessert when you stood up. You'll regret that. What a joy it is to be here in this absolutely magnificently beautiful hotel facility. I've got to be honest with you, I had no idea this was here. But I've talked to a lot of you in North Carolina, and you didn't either. There's an excuse that I didn't know. There's no excuse that you didn't know. But I know for many of you it is a long, long trip from the eastern part of the state to come over here. But I have a feeling you've decided that it's quite worth it to come to such a magnificent facility. I want to tell you that I would like to get you out of here in time to go watch my television show on Fox. I don't think that's going to work out, so please watch it tomorrow. I need the ratings. That's the only job security I have right now. It's about as fickle as politics. You know, you're up, you're down, you're out if you're not up, and that's the way it goes. Thank goodness we've been up for 6 years in a row, and I'm grateful for those of you who have I want to tell you about a little girl that I met in Springdale, Arkansas. During my tenure as governor, every year we would have Reading Week in Arkansas. I'm sure you have it in North Carolina. And it was pretty typical that kind of to put a focus on the importance of reading. As governor, I would go to some school and I would read a story to children, and that would get all the television stations and newspapers to come out, have pictures of the governor sitting there with some kids reading a story. So I went to the George Elementary School in Springdale, Arkansas, and that's where I was supposed to go to read to a group of first graders. Now, I'd been to a science fair a little earlier in the morning. We were running a few minutes behind because the science fair projects were more intense than we had anticipated. And so by the time I got to George Elementary in Springdale, the principal was at the door, wringing her hands, all excited. Oh, Governor, they're waiting for you. They're all set. Let's hurry down the hall. So she ushered me down the hall to the first grade class where I was supposed to sit and read a story. I got into the room. All the kids were already assembled, seated on the floor, all in front of the class, and they had one of those little first grade chairs there in front of me. You know the chair that I'm talking about. So they ushered me up there to sit in a little first grade chair, and they handed me the storybook that I was supposed to read to children. Well, I didn't want to just open the book and start reading. I mean, I wanted to build some connection with these kids, so I opened up the book, and I said, before I read, I just want to see if any of you have any questions, if you'd like to tell something to me. Well, first graders always like to talk, and so every hand went up. Every last one of them. And so I called on a little boy, and he was telling me, you know, it was close to Halloween. He told me what he was going to dress up to be. And every little hand continued to be up. But there was one girl in the front. I mean, right in front of me. And while every kid had her hand up, this little girl was just, she was so full of energy, and I thought, my gosh, she's gonna wear herself out. And of course, what I decided was, well, I'm going to call on every kid but her for now. And I know you think that's kind of rude, but I just want to see, could she keep this up? Because if so, I was going to hire her. She had a lot more energy than most of the people on my staff. And so sure enough, as I went around the class and asked them all to say what they wanted to say, this little girl just kept it going. And so finally, since she was the last one, full of energy, I said, yes, sweetheart. I later found out her name was Ashley. I said, yes, sweetheart, on what she said. Because when I called on her, I said, yes, sweetheart, what do you want to tell me? She said, Governor, we're already late for lunch. You see, what had happened was, I was there on Wednesday, and Wednesday was corn dog day at George Elementary. And little Ashley was afraid that if we didn't hurry up and get this story and get to the cafeteria, she was going to either miss a corn dog or she'd have a cold one. And somehow, the fact that the governor of the state had traveled all the way across the entirety of Arkansas to be in her classroom, of all the classrooms in the state, meant nothing to her. What mattered to her was, get me to my corn dog and do it now. Well, I must tell you, my staff laughed at me for quite a while with that and said, well, you thought you were a big deal. Corn dog's more important to you, to those kids. They tried to call me Governor Corn Dog for a while. I told them that they would be called unemployed if they kept that. But I learned a valuable lesson because I watched that little girl and I saw the enthusiasm that she had for something so simple, so totally unrelated to the things that I was worried about in those days. And here's what I realized. I would to God that every day of that little girl's life, the biggest thing she had to ever worry about was getting a corn dog on time. And getting And then I realized that because we're living in a world like we're living in, that little girl's got a lot more to worry about as she gets older. And folks, that was several years ago. And I'll tell you, I've never been so worried in my life as I am for Ashley and all those kids in the first grade classrooms across America. Those are your kids and your grandkids. And today, the reason that it's so important that Republicans come together, center ourselves around a message of hope and optimism for our country, and remind America what's great about this nation, is because we need to raise a generation of kids who are optimistic and hopeful about the future, but whose children don't have to worry about that their dad doesn't have a job and that they're not going to be able to have a Christmas this year. Yesterday was the 70th anniversary of D-Day. All of us are thinking about that. How could we not? And we think about the fact that 160,000 Allied troops landed on the 5 beaches of Normandy on June the 6th of 1944 to start and launch what would become the beginning of the end of the Nazi murder machine. A little over a year ago, my wife and I went to Normandy, and I stood on Omaha Beach on a cold January day. Nobody else was there because it was cold and desolate, windy. And I was kind of glad we had it all to ourselves, because as I stood there, it was so sobering to think that as I looked down at the sand under my feet, that 69 years before, that sand had been blood-red with the blood of young Americans who had left their homes, their families, their hopes, their careers, their farms, their businesses. Many of them, most all of them, younger than my youngest child. Many of them in their late teens. And they were coming out of those boats to a wall of German gunfire from the rifles, the machine guns, and the artillery that was raining down upon them. One thing that struck me was how close they were when they landed on those beaches to the German positions up above. Somehow, I guess in the movies, it never really gave me the perspective. I always thought it was so far away. It wasn't. It was right on top of them. And I thought about the courage that they must have had and the fear that must have accompanied that courage as they continued to storm those beaches. 10,000 would die on that day. Tens of thousands more would be wounded. And I think about what they gave to us. These are the men who came back, who got married, who raised families, who bought houses, who worked in manufacturing plants, who built a middle class in America, the likes of which has never been built in such a short period of time, and who gave hope and optimism to those of us who are the baby boomer generation, who grew up living in a world in which we believed America could do anything. We grew up with a president who said in 1961, we're going to put a man on the moon within the next decade, and we're going to bring him back home again. And you know what? We believed that we were going to do that. And I remember in the summer of 1969 watching Neil Armstrong come off that lunar module, put his feet on the ground and say, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. We were living in a country in which we believed that America could put its mind to anything and do anything. We weren't afraid of the Russians. Oh, we knew they were there. We knew they had nuclear weapons. But we knew that we had power that was greater than theirs. And we weren't really afraid of them. I remember as a kid, like some of you, those of you who are old, remember when you were in school, in the like elementary school years, and we used to do the duck and cover routine? Does anybody remember that? Then you're old too. Okay, thank you. Duck and cover. Think about this. They would tell us, now if we have a nuclear blast, get up under your desk. You ever thought about that? First of all, that the Soviets would launch a nuclear attack on Hope, Arkansas was pretty unlikely. But I never thought through that. It never occurred to me how irrational it was to think, yes, when the Ruskies get mad, they're going to start the tip of the spear right here, Hope, Arkansas. I never thought about how that Brookwood Elementary School in Hope was probably not going to be the epicenter of the nuclear war. But I was prepared, because if it were to happen, I knew one thing. I would be crawling up under that desk where I would be protected from nuclear disaster. While the rest of the world around me was vaporized, that little school desk would totally protect me, and that's why I was going to duck and cover. Nobody said that some of our ideas were smart. We just were dutifully going about the business. But deep down, you know what? We weren't worried about it. Quite frankly, we were more worried about getting our corn dogs on time, because so many people had done the heavy lifting for us. Those men who stormed the beaches of Normandy had done that. Those people who had gone to Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal and Okinawa, and those who marched through Italy, and those who put an end to the tyranny of the Nazis. They made it so that the world in which I grew up in, with all the flaws that we could see in our own country, at least we had hope and we had optimism, and we were raised to believe that America was a country where anything was possible. There was a survey last week of the Deutsche Bank that found that of 18 to 34-year-olds in this country, 1/3 are still living at home with their parents. 1/3 of the young millennials, 18 to 34, living at home. Look, folks, I've always said the two greatest days in a parent's life, the day the kid is born and the day that the kid leaves college or school and gets out of your payroll and on somebody else's. And we got kids today who aren't getting off of the parents' payroll. A lot of them voted for Barack Obama because he promised hope and change, and now they just hope they can find the change and the coins in their parents' sofa, because that's the only change they're getting these days. There has never been a better time for us to present our message to younger Americans, because right now there is such a discouragement level among those 18 to 34-year-olds that only 23% of them are even planning to vote this year. Why? Because they're disillusioned. You see, they thought if they voted for a very liberal Democratic Party, that we were just going to somehow get all kinds of free stuff. And that America would be better, and we'd be respected again across the world. We'd get our standing back, our footing back, our economy would grow. And what they've seen over the past 6 years is that under this administration, not only has our economy imploded with extraordinarily high unemployment rates, 92 million Americans out of the workforce altogether, not even attempting to go to work because they've given up. And I asked some of my Democrat friends, and yes, I do have a few. Usually after I ask this question, I don't have them anymore. But here's the question I love to pose to them. I say, look, you're a big defender of this president and this administration. I just want to pose a question to you. Can you name one country on this planet, just one, in which we have a better relationship with them today than we did in January of 2009? And you know what? I've yet to have even the staunchest supporters of the president and his administration. Israel can't trust us anymore. Why would they? We're giving $400 million to a government that is now going to be united with a terrorist organization, Hamas. Think about that. We're going to give $400 million of your dollars to a group that we have defined in our own government definitions as a terrorism group. That in their initial charter says they want to destroy Israel. If you're Israel, how do you think that makes you feel? And it's not just our friends that we've alienated. Nobody trusts us anymore. And nobody respects us. And nobody fears us. And quite frankly, and let me be blunt, I really don't give a rat's rear if the whole world dislikes us. But I do want them to respect us, and if not respect us, fear us. I want them to understand that the United States of America is. My wife and I just got back from China a week ago. We were there for a little over 2 weeks, and we went to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary. And we had a great time. Thank you. I was hoping somebody would say, "Oh, you're too young to have been married that long." You didn't. It's too late now. Forget about it. But we, like most Arkansas couples, got married when we were 12. And that's why we were so young. But there was a reluctance on my part to want to go. I've been all over the parts of Asia. I've been to Korea, and I've been to Japan, and many times to Taiwan, and other places all over the Middle East and Europe, and the Americas. Yeah, I never had been to China, and frankly, I've been a little reluctant to go because I'm not a big fan of the communist government of China, to be honest with you. I don't like the way they violated the human rights of their people. I don't care a whole lot for the way in which that they have created this one-child policy that forces the destruction of a lot of innocent human beings. I mean, there's many things that I can't appreciate about them. The way they've manipulated currency, the way that they've dumped products on the United States, robbing us of a lot of jobs that working men and women in this country ought to be having and would have if we would stand up to them and tell them we're not going to let them cheat in trade agreements. I wish that we could knock out death of intellectual property, where they take the ideas that we create and then they steal them and then they make things with them. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things that shocked me was this vibrant, incredible economy that they have. And here's what I came back with. China is becoming more like America used to be. And America is becoming more like China used to be. And that, my friend, scares the living daylights out of me. That must change. I'm going to be very clear. It's not that I fear that China might be getting strong, because frankly, I'm not threatened if other countries have a developing and a blooming economy. I hope they do. All of the countries across this planet who have a better economy, ultimately, that should be better for the United States. It means more people with money to buy things that we innovate and make. But here's what worries me. If we quit making and innovating things because we turn all of that over to countries like China, then it is a concern to us. I don't worry that China is becoming strong. I worry that America is becoming weak, and we need leadership in this country that gets back to the place where America is strong and not weak. There were some things that were pretty amazing. They're building their infrastructure at an amazing rate. The roads, the bridges, the airports, the utility systems to take care of the urbanization of their population. The freeways, they look like Los Angeles at rush hour. And you know what was really startling? I expected to see, like you see in most foreign countries, a bunch of little bitty cars with little bitty people driving little bitty places and eating little bitty lunches. These guys are driving big cars. And none of them are Chinese cars. None of them. Maybe 1 in 100 that I saw on the highway were actual Chinese brand. Everything else, there were Buicks, Fords, Nissan, Lexus, BMW, Mercedes, the big cars. And I'm thinking, where'd they get all the money to buy these things? Yeah, that's right, from us. That's where they got it. And then I'm watching this huge consumer market there. But I'm saying, okay, so they've got a lot of new consumers, and so they're buying Prada, and they're buying Louis Vuitton, and they're buying Givenchy, and they have the big stores everywhere. It's like Fifth Avenue on steroids. I mean, it was stunning. Then I thought, there's still some things about the Chinese that aren't so good. For example, they control the internet. Boy, do they ever. You try to Google up Tiananmen Square 1989, can't find it, they block it. I asked our young guide in Beijing as we were standing in Tiananmen Square, I said, tell me, what is it that you talk about what happened here in 1989? And she's about 30 years old. She looks at me, and she looks at me with a quizzical look like, I don't know what you're talking about. Because it has been carefully scrubbed from their schools. And I thought, that's one thing. I'm sure glad that in America we don't scrub our history textbooks. And then I thought, yeah, we do too, but somehow we forgot to tell this generation of young Americans that this nation was founded as one nation under God with people who got on their knees to pray to our Creator. How can we be critical of them having gotten rid of so much of their history when we seem to be getting rid of so much of our incredible history of how this nation came to be? Then I saw how they regulated so many things. Oh boy, the intense regulation of China. Regulate where you can live. You have to get a permit from the government to buy an apartment, a permit to live at a certain place. And I thought, man, I'm so glad that our government doesn't restrict anything about the land that we personally own and tell us. And then I thought, yeah, I guess our government is beginning to get more like that. And then a government that shuts down dissent. Then I thought about all the ways that when people make their voices heard, even simple things, standing up for marriage and for the simple idea of the sanctity of human life, I thought, boy, they really shut that down in China, but we shut that down here. And yes, the one-child policy and the forced abortion that has plagued China and been a scourge to their population. And then I realized 55 million unborn children have died in this country because we thought that some people were disposable and expendable. Yes, my friend, I'm not so worried that China might be getting more like we used to be. I'm worried that we're getting more like they used to be. And that's why this election year is so very vital and important, because we can't afford to let Harry Reid continue to sit in the front of the room of the Senate for one more day. Those of you who live in North Carolina are one of the most important states. You absolutely must retire Kay Hagan and let Tom. As you may know, I supported one of Tom's opponents, Mark Harris, in this race, because I've known Mark and I love him, and I'm so grateful for him and his message. And I hope he's far from finished in politics. But I also know this, the primary is over. The voters have spoken. You have a nominee, and I'm grateful that all of the people of North Carolina are coming together in united support, not just because they want a Republican, but because they want someone who will not vote to let Harry Reid continue to let Washington, D.C., and specifically the Senate become the Roach Motel where things go in, but nothing ever gets out of there. The rest of the country to see the kind of leadership that your Governor McCrory, has provided. It's refreshing. And by the way, I want to say that a bold move by your governor and your legislature in looking at the very extraordinarily high unemployment rate that North Carolina had that exceeded the national average, you did a gutsy thing that a lot of people predicted would miserably fail. And that is, you exercised what most of us would say is just a little common sense. You see, the idea was that instead of providing extended benefits for not working, you would say, look, we're going to bring them in because we can't afford to continue to pay people to not work. And guess what? Exactly what you think would happen once people were no longer renewed. Now, a lot of people to this day are scratching their heads and saying, we don't understand it. Let me explain it to them. When you reward a behavior, you get more of it. And when you consequence the behavior, you get less of it. This is pretty simple. And by the way, I didn't learn that being governor. You know how I learned that? I learned that being a father. And I learned it having children. I learned it also by having dogs. My wife and I have 3 children. They're all grown now. Youngest is 32, and we have a 34-year-old and a 38-year-old. And my kids are grown. They're out on their own. And as they started to leave the nest, something happened. We've always had dogs at our house. It was not intentional. We didn't think about it. We didn't plan it, but we ended up with 3 dogs. 3 kids. They leave. 3 dogs. And the kids swear up and down that we replaced them with the dogs. We told them, no, it was not, we did not do this. This is not some vicarious substitution. It just happened. And especially our kids were upset because they said, not only did you replace us with dogs, but you treat the dogs better than you ever treated us. To which I replied, but the dogs behaved better than you ever did. Now here's a lesson that I learned raising those kids and training the dogs, and it's simple. If there is a behavior that you want more of, reward the behavior. You get more of it. And if there is a behavior that you want less of, consequence the behavior. By the way, I'm using the word consequence intentionally because I realize it is the politically correct word to use. In my generation, it would have been punish the behavior. That's what happened to me. I didn't understand consequence and timeout chairs. I wish we'd have had those. My backside would have done much better with a timeout chair than it did with what we ended up with. My father, the most patriotic American I think ever lived in Arkansas. The man laid on the stripes, I saw stars. That's how it was then. But I understood that if there was a behavior that he didn't want, he was going to consequence it all right. Look, that's common sense. Do we want to turn America's economy around, put people back to work? You bet we do. Well, let me tell you how we can do it. We can get rid of Harry Reid as the majority leader, make him sit in the back of the room and watch Mitch McConnell and the Republicans take real leadership. In 2 years, we can get rid of this president, his administration, and the nightmare that it's brought onto this country, and we can replace with a Republican president who actually wants to lead this country and lead this world. And when that happens, I hope and pray that our Republican House, our Republican Senate, and our Republican president will stop rewarding the behavior that we don't want and stop consequencing and start consequencing the behavior we don't. And here's what will happen. We'll change our tax code, because why would we punish people for working and punish them even more for working harder? Why would we say the harder you work, the more you work? If you work twice as hard, if you work as hard as these people who are carrying these heavy trays around tonight, and you do a double shift and work overtime, we're going to put you in a new tax bracket, and instead of letting you earn and keep all the money that you've worked so hard for, we're going to take a bigger chunk of it. Now, can anybody tell me that that makes sense for the hardworking people? No, it does not. Why should we punish productivity and reward reckless irresponsibility? And I don't care who it is. If there's some big bank on Wall Street or some insurance company and they recklessly run their company into the ground, I do not think it is the responsibility of the American taxpayer to reward them for their reckless irresponsibility with billions and billions of more dollars. Folks, common sense says that's not how you build a strong economy or a strong country. In this state, your governor and your legislature has taken a national leadership role in proving that that is exactly the case. And I want to see that kind of spirit, that kind of mindset happen, not just in North Carolina, but all across America. I'm convinced, by the way, that our country is not on its last leg. I'm convinced that we don't have to just give up, roll over, and say, there's nothing we can do. I'm sorry, our kids are not going to live better than we have. Up until this generation, every generation believed that they lived better than their parents, and believe that their kids would live better than them. This is the first generation in which today parents don't believe their children will live better than they did, and the children don't believe it either. Folks, America doesn't just have an altitude problem, it's got an attitude problem. We've got to change the attitude. We will change the altitude, but the attitude isn't going to change until we get some people who get back to the bedrock fundamentals of what made America such a great country. And that is that we were not a country that looked behind us, we were a country that always looked ahead of us. Back in February of 2001, I had the opportunity to go to Salt Lake City at the invitation of my good friend, Governor Mike Levin, who was governor of Utah at the time. He invited me and a couple of other governors to come out and be part of a conference he had on the weekend. We all got out there to Salt Lake City, did the conference on Friday night. He got up at the end and he said, now folks, tomorrow we have a very special treat for you. The Olympic Games will happen in Salt Lake City 1 year from now, February of 2002. The Olympic Village is pretty much finished in its construction. Many of the athletes are already there training, and tomorrow you're going to be some of the first people to go to Olympic Village behind the scenes, meet the athletes, watch them train. You're going to see some remarkable things a year in advance of the Olympics, and we have a special treat. We're going to have the governor's bobsled competition. That got my attention. Now look, I grew up in South Arkansas, not just in Arkansas, but South Arkansas. We never saw snow. Once every couple of years, we'd have a little dusting. We'd cancel school, and we'd sit home and, wait till the snow melted the next day. And we'd laugh our heads off at Yankees. People that lived up north, for those of you that don't know what a Yankee is. And the reason we did is because there would always be news reports of how many people had died of heart attacks shoveling snow. And we thought, those dumb Yankees. Shoveling snow? What's that about? Why would you shovel something that'll melt? I didn't know a single person, nobody, who owned a snow shovel, for heaven's sakes. No need. So I never, thought about snow that much, and certainly had never seen a bobsled in person. The only thing I ever remember about a bobsled was in the opening scenes of Wide World of Sports on ABC. Remember the ski jumper that so gracefully landed down the mountain, and the announcer said, "The thrill of victory." And then there was a bobsled that went careening off the side of the mountain, and the announcer said, "And the agony of defeat." And I'm thinking the agony of decapitation is what I'm thinking after the bobsled. So that's my mental image, and I go up after the announcement and I say, "Levitt, you gotta be kidding, we're not really gonna get on the bobsled." He said, "Oh yeah, but don't worry, we're gonna get you some training." Somehow that didn't completely console me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I got up the next morning. I was hoping one of the other governors would decide that really wasn't a smart idea to put us in a bobsled, but they were all eager. A bunch of Yankees. I'm the only one with good sense in the bunch, and I didn't want to look like a wimp, so I'm in. And I get out there, and my training consisted of pairing me up with a 16-year-old junior Olympic athlete. 16. We put spikes on my boots, and we start at the bottom of the bobsled track, which is nothing more than a solid sheet of ice, 1 mile in length, and all downhill. But we start at the bottom of it, and he walks me up from the bottom to the top, spikes on my feet, this icy track, and explains to me where I need to steer the bobsled's tracks and skids in each of the 12 curves on that course. We get to he say, "This is like number 12. And when we get here, you need to put the skids like right here. Because if you get them up here, we could like go off. And that's not good. And if they get way down here, we'll like bounce back and forth on the wall. And that'll hurt. And the next one, and then all the way up to the top. And he's telling me where to put the skids on. I'm trying to remember all this. We get to the top, and I'm now hyperventilating. In part, I'm exhausted. And in part, I'm terrified. I'm pretty sure that night the news is going to have a report, late-breaking bulletin, in Salt Lake City, the governor of Arkansas tragically killed tonight. They tried to drive a bobsled. "Governor, are you ready?" I said, said, what, to meet Jesus? I mean, this does not end well in my mind. Just before we go down, the kid says to me something that turned out to be incredibly good advice. Here's what he said. He said, when we come off the top of the hill, you're going to see the first curve. And as soon as you see it, you steer for it. Because by the time you will have had the opportunity to react to it, you're going to be in the curve. He said, if you think you've made a mistake behind you, don't worry about it. There's nothing you can do about the ice behind you. The ice behind you cannot hurt you. The implication being the ice in front of you still can. But he said, and if you're in the curve and you think you're making a mistake, do not overcompensate. In fact, don't try to fix anything in the curve because centrifugal force will be controlling the bobsled, and just wait till you get out of the curve. And as soon as you come out of it, you'll see the next curve. Steer for the curve ahead. And he said if you'll just steer for the curve ahead, we'll be fine. But that kid had no idea the profundity of his comment, but I'm telling you, I thought about it and I realized he'd given me a great piece of advice, not just for getting the bobsled down the track safely, but he gave me a great piece of advice for governing, and a great piece of advice for being a husband, a father, or running a business. Quit worrying about all the things behind you. You can't change them, you can't fix them, they can't hurt you anymore. Don't try to fix everything at once. You can't do it. If you're in the middle of a problem, don't think you're going to fix it all at an event, because you can't. I sometimes want to say to people in the legislative process, folks, when you get to the legislative process, realize it's a process, it's not an event. You're not going to get everything. Take the good lesson from those great political scientists, the Rolling Stones. Whose advice came in the form of a song. You can't always get what you want. But just remember this. Steer for the curve ahead. And it'll turn out okay. You know what America needs? It needs people who love God, who love this country, who love their families, who love the future of what America must be, and who, no matter what, will steer for the curve ahead. Thank you.